All right, what's happening, Domaniacs? It's Bryce Schumacher here again, aka BigBS, and today I've got a cool topic at hand. It's about game ownership and preservation. Before we get into that, I just want to say thank y'all for a great 2024 and helping us hit our goal of 2,000 subscribers. If you don't already subscribe, go ahead and hit it right there for you. And make sure to hit the like and comments on this video here as we talk about game preservation and ownership. And I just want to say Happy New Year to y'all. I know I've been gone for a few weeks. I've been sick and then dealing with holidays, but we're back, and 2025 is going to be a great year for the domain. So make sure to follow us here and Instagram, TikTok, and check out our Next Level podcast. So today I want to talk about a little bit about game ownership and erosion. 2024 was the year that gamers really started pushing back on the erosion of game ownership. So ever since the advent of digital distribution, which despite what some may think does predate Steam, gamers have worried about ownership of their games. Time was that this sense of unease was mixed up with an understandable nostalgia for physical media, that comforting sense of having the disc and always owning the game. But as the physical and retail side has become a smaller part of the picture, which is essentially true on PC, our questions about the various digital storefronts and Steam's default status have become more pointed. And it feels like 2024 is the year when gamers en masse started to get serious about the erosion of their ownership of software that they paid good money for. The arguments have been around forever, but they've been made concrete by the simple fact that over the last decade in particular, we've seen more and more games simply disappear. And we're not talking about obscure hobbyist projects, but seriously big budget titles that companies have spent millions developing and hundreds of devs spent years of their careers on. 2024 even gave us the perfect poster boy, Concord, Sony's live service shooter that lasted all of 11 days before being taken out behind the sheds and shot in the head, essentially, metaphorically. That seems incredible, doesn't it? Concord was a AAA title shooter backed by PlayStation, one of the biggest and most money-lad brands in gaming, and it didn't last 2 weeks. For the average punter, Concord may as well not even existed. But Concord is just one high-profile example from dozens, and it feels like the combination of prominent games disappearing from storefronts and so many having online elements that will never work again has brought the issue to the forefront of many more people's minds. Arguments about preservation for future generations may attract the wonks among us, but for the mainstream audience, it is now not uncommon to fork over $60 or whatever for a game that may well not be playable in 2 years down the line, or at the very least compromised beyond the experience promised at launch. I don't envy folk trying to play Suicide Squads in a year time, albeit in this case Rocksteady has committed to adding an offline mode. The main way this growing concern found expression, or the most prominent at least, was the Stop Killing Games campaign. This was sparked by Ubisoft pulling the plug on The Crew in April this year, or last year, 2024. With the 10-year-old racing game now unplayable, no offline mode coming due to server infrastructure and licensing constraints, which upset fan and YouTuber Ross Scott enough to begin rallying support around Stop Killing Games website. The idea is to create a focal point for opposition to what Scott calls the industry's assault on both consumer rights and preservation of media, and the site's purpose is to direct consumers towards other gathering points such as major online petitions and advise them on how to submit complaints to regulatory bodies like the DGCCRF, France's Consumer Protection Agency. The legal argument is that video games should be classified as goods rather than services, regardless of the terminology publishers use, and goods shouldn't be able to be rendered inoperable by the seller after consumers buy them. Some of the arguments do seem a bit out there. A proposed class action lawsuit saying players of The Crew were duped by Ubisoft compared The situation to the publisher entering people's homes and stealing parts of a pinball machine, that's a lot out there. But other elements of it have the chance to enact real change by getting the regulators interested. Stop Killing Games is currently running a petition which, if it reaches 1 million signatures by July 2025, will oblige the EU to consider a ban on making multiplayer games unplayable. It currently has over 400,000 signatures. This was also happening in a wider context of both publishers and regulators realizing that, at the very least, there are some big questions to answer about digital ownership. Even if players might not like the answers, Steam added a new disclaimer about ownership, which wasn't exactly new, but seemed forced by the rise in big publishers rendering games inoperable and, in some cases, revoking their licenses. The message also followed shortly after a new Californian law that requires retailers to warn consumers that the digital games they buy can be taken away at any time. Exactly what this message does. Point with this example being that Valve appears to be looking at the California law and assuming that other states will follow suit and dealing with it in the most simple way possible, applying the new language to everyone rather than responding on a state-by-state and region-by-region basis. Never missing an opportunity to weigh in on such matters, the GOG, formerly Good Old Games, took a moment to remind players that, hey, anything you buy from us is yours forever and cannot be taken away. But GOG does walk the line, and this year committed to a new preservation program whereby it'll keep games like New Vegas running on contemporary systems in perpetuity, regardless of what publishers do. And the final GOG hit, it'll now let you bequeath your library to someone as long as you can prove you're actually dead, or someone can. So you can actually pass down your library through the GOG. GOG shows this is not just a matter of players versus the game industry. In fact, many industry grandees and studios think that actually the industry is doing a terrible job with this stuff and giving players a raw deal in the process. Larian's director of publishing, Michael Dose, got all heated up about Ubisoft's moves over the year and flipped the tables on the publishers, saying that if players had to get used to not owning games, developers must get used to not having jobs. Not everything is quite so confrontational, though. Certain publishers are much more alive than others to the value of their back catalogs. And some, like Capcom, make their heritage a key part of their current strategy with re-releases and remakes. Across the industry, there's more of a sense of value of older games, and quite apart from the preservation angle, that we will be eventually inspired better practices from more publishers. More and more publishers are seeing the sense in partnering with companies who devote themselves to practice of sprucing up and servicing old games. 2024 was another great year for Night Dive, for example, a studio that specializes in polishing up and remastering old classics. From System Shock to Dark Forces to The Thing. I was doing remasters even before I joined Night Dive, says Larry Cooperman. One of the earliest ones was Total Annihilation, that I was involved in when I was at Stardock. We had a lot of resistance from people. It was taken as an art project, not a commercial project, because the thought was, well, who would ever buy these old games? They were great then and they're great now. Companies have begun to realize that, and certainly we've have a leadership role in that. But we're not the only company doing that these days. Everybody is. There are a lot of different issues smushed together under the idea of ownership and preservation, and 2024 feels like the year that many came to much greater prominence for players and rule makers alike. The question of whether you own your Steam games, for example, can be fairly simply answered by right now. No, you don't. Valve can take them from you at a moment's notice, and there's nothing you can do about it. Many of us have known that for a long time and traded it for convenience, but it feels like we're reaching a point where these platforms are so core to our lives in video games, and the personal investment in them is getting so high that the wider audience is no longer happy with that. More and more of us are realizing that, and it feels And even if it feels otherwise, we don't own our games. And there's no good reason to just accept that when there are alternatives. So 2024, we're looking at, the game preservation and the ownership rights and everything. And if you don't know, this should give you a perspective of where we stand. We don't own our games when we buy digital games. Even physical games nowadays, we don't really own them because of the licensing and everything that's tied to it, with them being considered a service and not a good. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Does this resonate with you? Do you just not care? Or should more be done? Or, do you feel like we're taking steps in the right direction? I remember, it's not like it used to be when you had a NES, a Super Nintendo, you had the physical game, you pop it in and it plays, no matter what. Nowadays, these games are shutting down, or you're just not allowed to play it for licensing purposes. So me personally, I'd love to see all the games stay alive, because there's always something great to learn from each of these games, and all the time that people put into creating these unique challenges and unique art and unique immersive worlds, and just the fun puzzles and everything, the challenges that come with video gaming. But that's going to do it for me. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me. I'm Bryce Schumacher, aka BigBS, once again here on the domain Gaming, Pop Culture, and Entertainment. Make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, and leave some comments so we can have a conversation after the video. I appreciate you hanging out with me. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.